Can we all stand for the flag, please? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is the zoning subcommittee of September 12th, 2018. Madam Clerk, shall we have the roll call?
Roll call of the members of the zoning subcommittee. Councilor Morabito.
Here.
Here. Councilor Patch.
Here.
Here. Councilor Rizzo.
Here.
Here. Councilor Zambudo is absent, and Chairman Rotundo.
Present.
Here. Quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to start with the following motion of Councilor Keefe. It's 18-231 regarding short-term rental ordinances, or shall we call it the Airbnb ordinance, just so that people understand what we're talking about. Recently, there's been some questionable issues regarding people renting certain properties within the city, unfortunately giving a bad name to Airbnb, and more importantly, truly causing issue with a lot of the people in various neighborhoods. For the most part, I have to say that Airbnb has been a very good thing for the city of Revere, and there are very, very responsible people within our city that do use Airbnb and rent Airbnb responsibly. Unfortunately, because of this one and several other incidences, we're going to have to put some type of ordinance together and stop the behavior that's taken place. And I want to kind of go to one incident in particular, and I'm going to ask some people to come before the council and speak about what they've seen and what they heard. Several weeks back, there was a rental within the western part of Revere in which this property was rented basically as a, I don't want to say flop house, but as a party house. And that people were actually coming in from every which way looking for this particular property so that they could go there and have a party. Not to come here and go to Boston and go to the Freedom Trail or go to the Constitution or go eat down on Hanover Street or enjoy Revere Beach, but to come over there and get drunk, have a party, and basically do whatever the hell they wanted. To the point that I was told that some of these, quote, party goers were on top of the roof of this person's property with cases of alcohol, and not only just causing true ruckus, but endangering themselves and those people within the area. So with that said, if anybody in the audience would like to come up and speak about that particular event or any of their events that they've seen thereafter, I'd greatly appreciate it. Press the button, name and address, please.
Richard Ireton, 115 Davis Street. As you had mentioned, I'm not totally against Airbnb. What I want to talk about is the process in itself and what might need to be put in place. But to confirm what you had just said, about 2 weeks ago, I heard a bunch of voices in my backyard. What I felt was my backyard. About 1 o'clock in the morning, so I went out, take a look, couldn't see anything. This continued on, I kept hearing the voices. It's now 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a Monday night, Tuesday morning. I finally went outside the house, went in my backyard to go look up the street when I heard the voices, and I looked up. And there were 8 to 10 people on the roof of the house. I don't know the ages, but very young. And I could see 2 cases of beer up there, and they were sitting there having a party. It's this type of use that gives Airbnb a bad name. But I also believe that as a body, and the city itself has to look at, where these should be. Some kind of ordinance put in place that a single-family home in a residential neighborhood is not a destination vacation resort. I understand these people are renting it and they're on vacation. We're not. At 4:30 in the morning, I went out, got in my car to go get my coffee. and they're still up there, and they're still drinking. Most recently, last Friday night, I didn't hear this because I'm in the front of my house. One of my family members had to go outside at around midnight and ask them, please, you have to quiet down. Now, we don't want to call the police. We're not, in that neighborhood, we've never had to do that. I didn't call the police that night. I could have. We want to try to be a good neighbor, but there has to be some kind of ordinance or guidelines for these type of what I refer to as daily rentals. These were clearly young. This went over 3 days. It wasn't until almost Thursday that the last person left. And they were coming and going at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I get it, if you're in a hotel room, that's fine. That's what the hotels are designed for. Not a single-family home in a residential neighborhood in what I consider to be one of the finest neighborhoods in the city. I mean, it is we've all lived there 50, 60, 70 years. And if the original people aren't there, their family is, their children, their nephews. We take care of each other. We look out for each other. We always have. I have, my sisters have, my next door neighbors have. The home directly across from me was just recently remodeled. Wonderful people. They live there. Even the tenant, you don't hear a word out of them. But as soon as you give that the ability to rent on a daily basis, New York, Philadelphia, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, I mean, I should say Pennsylvania rather instead of Philadelphia, they're coming in from everywhere. We don't know who they are. We have no clue who these folks are. And we could see right up, I could look in, they're all in the kitchen, they're up on the roof. This is a problem for an area like mine. And it may not be a real problem right now, although it's certainly an inconvenience. I can see this growing into a bigger problem. And I really appreciate Councilor Rotundo and the body for taking this matter up and letting people speak on it. Going forward, I see this as being a real problem. How you guys deal with that, that's up to you, but we need your help, and that's what we're looking for. Thank you for your time.
Teresa Ireton, 113 Davis Street. My property, the back of my property abuts the house in question. And I'm not going to go through the same thing. Basically, I've been out there every night now because you get concerned. You don't know who's there. I read the ordinance totally from Boston, and I think it's wonderful. I just have one comment. I personally think if there's violations, it should be way more than $100. That's chump change. So.
I think the highest, and correct me, Madam Clerk, is 300 we can go up to after crescendo.
Since the inception of 40U, I believe the fee structure is even more than that, but I would have to check with Nicholas Catanazzo, Inspectional Services.
So, Mrs. Ireton, from my perspective, is I would start off, probably first violation would be a written warning, second violation would be $250, then after that would be $500 for every day that they are violating that. More importantly, there also has to be a screening process.
Right.
In which a licensing fee takes place, but more importantly, what they do in Europe and what they do in the Caribbean and elsewhere is, and they do it here in America, but when you go to a particular home, the person that has the home actually is aware of your identity because it's online. But what I would go further is that what they do in Rome is they take a copy of your passport because they want to know who you are. They want to know how many people are going to be in there. More importantly, what Boston's ordinance does not have is the amount of people that you can have in a particular property. So you can have a 2-bedroom there, and you can put as many as 10 people in there, and there's nothing anybody's going to say. However, if we were to rent an apartment, you could not have 10 people in that property.
Right.
So there has to be some type of legal way of presenting that in an ordinance, which I'll speak to our solicitor about in order to ensure that takes place. I think if you've got 2 bedrooms, 4 people, even 6 is at the top of the level as far as I'm concerned. But I think, there's a legal boundary that we have to follow.
Yeah. The other thing, and this probably doesn't have anything to do with the ordinance, but after I read it, I thought, if this is a single-family home, this gentleman is paying the tax rate for a single-family home. I think there should be another tax rate introduced if they're going to be renting out the houses on a nightly basis. That's just,
I understand that. I think once you get into that, one would say use, and they could make the same commentary as far as a two-family versus a three-family. Then would you get a different rate? Would you be considered commercial property at that point? One could make that argument. It's a slippery slope.
yeah, okay.
So I appreciate that. It makes sense. Again, I would have to leave that up to solicitor. I have a feeling, speaking to some lawyers in the past, that that would be a very slippery slope.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, so if we can, under penalties, 9-14.9, if we can change the $100 in section B to $300 per violation per day?
That sounds perfect. But that has to be the first, the first violation should be a written warning. The second violation should be the 300, and then after that, the highest that we can provide. Because the last time I spoke to Nick, and he can give us better guidance on this, is that what has happened at Chelsea District Court sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk, is they'll go down there with a slew of actual violations, and many times they get thrown out or they don't get entirely charged up.
The new 40U program, it's in-house.
Who's the person that we're using? Is it
Mr.
Bob
Gaber.
Merritt? Mr. Gaber, okay. So, what do you figure the top, do we know what that top number is? Okay, I'm gonna look it up. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councilors? Council Patch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also am reading the Boston ordinance. They pretty well cover everything. But I like the idea of the 3 or more finding of violations of this section within a 6-month period. I really would like to, I think just the 3, I just think the 3 violations is enough to have it just right. Other than that, I have no problem with this at all,
So
Mr. Chairman.
So, Councilor Pat, I want to just speak on that, so I just want to be clear so that everybody hears this. So, for licensing purposes, 3 violations and you are removed. Sound good? Shelley, what was that, 914, 9, failed to register, failed to comply with notice of violation, enforcement 410.
1914-4A.
Oh, okay, you get underneath the appeal section,
Mr. Chairman, I noticed I missed a section. In section B and C, can we change the $100 to $300?
Sure, and the maximum, as I just looked it up, is $500. It says, if unpaid after 30 days, the ticket, regardless of the initial amount, increases to a maximum of $500, is automatically transferred to the city clerk and becomes a charge against the property. So tickets will be issued with the maximum fine of $500. So if we can make the maximum fine $500
Mr.
for
Chairman,
the
I'm fine with that.
third violation.
Because you got to figure, most of these people are renting them out online as if they're hotel rooms, and they're getting about $200 a night. So I think $500 would be fair.
I'm sure the people out there think it's more than fair, right? Council Powers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a real serious issue in this city. I'll give you an idea of what happened. I had a call from a resident on Chalmette Street about 2 years ago, and they were beside themselves. There were 3 people who had flown into Logan Airport from Paris, France, to rent a room that they suspected was some type of a hotel, and they were standing there with their luggage. I mean, it's insane. The city itself, public safety issues are here. We're building hotels in the city, and we're building hotels to raise revenue for the city. And the more these places are allowed to operate, we're losing the room excise tax, which can be considerable in any of these cases. No one's collecting room excise tax. No one's turning it into the city. And as a result, the hotels are suffering in the city from this. So I would hope that anything we can do here is dealt with severely and strongly, and we make an effort, a real concerted effort to eliminate these problems in the city. Thank you.
Council Powers, just to kind of point out for you, because it actually slipped my mind too, 914.7, there is a room occupancy excise tax to fit your needs that you speak about, and I think that would be something that we need to apply as well, and I agree with you, and we're going to apply it. And at this point, there's a very simple thing, and it'll actually help raise a lot of revenue. In part, we also need to look at it as a positive, but we have to find the correct people that are doing the proper things. I can think of several of them off the top of my head where they do a bang-out job. They're down in the Shirley Ave area, and I'll tell you, it's truly a good thing the way that they operate. It's truly a horrible way that the people in West Revere had operated that night at 1:30. Councilor Rizzo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think the Boston ordinance, if we were to mimic most of what they have and then change it to fit our needs, probably works. I just want to say, while we're here in subcommittee, you can't stop progress. The taxi drivers were upset when Uber came in, and I know we're building hotels, but Airbnb is here, and communities across the country are trying to find ways on how to deal with it. There's a big difference when people check into a hotel where the zoning for a hotel is, and where residential neighborhoods, like Mr. Ireton was just talking about, somebody's pulling up with their out-of-state plate and spending a night, 2 nights, a week, however long that they plan on staying. There's a big difference there, and just fundamentally the way that it impacts our neighborhoods, especially when you have some unruly tenants or occupants, you're going to have some trouble. And I think over time, that was kind of a disturbing story to hear, where you had young people, partying in all hours of the night. They don't live there. They don't have any attachment to the neighborhood. So I think in this section, 914-4A, I'd like to see more teeth instead of, after 3 or more violations. Why would we have to go 3 or more violations? Why not we say the first time that police have to be called, and the people who are operating these Airbnbs. By the way, this section 4 says 3 or more violations of the ordinance itself under section 4A. Well, this tells you units that can't be used as a Airbnb anyway. Why should it be 3 or more? That in and of itself. But when it comes to violations, whether it be noise or other disturbances, I would go along with even less than 3, maybe 2. I think after a while you see precedent is being set, and people by and large, when they buy their homes across the city, shouldn't be. If they are, then we've got a bigger problem than what we're talking about here. But they're buying homes to live in. They're not buying homes to turn them into rooming houses or turning them into hotels. They're buying homes for a certain quality of life. And I know there's neighbors that buy homes around those particular properties. That's why they buy there, to have a certain quality of life. And so I think when we finally draft our ordinance here, I'd like to see even more teeth than this, if it's at all possible or if it's acceptable to members of the council. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman.
I think part of, Councilor, one of the things that I'd like to do based upon that is have Solicitor Capizzi look at it, just because of the issue of due process. I don't know if there'd be any issues as far as the legality of it. I can't see why or why not, so I always, before I put something of this nature forward, I'm gonna have this looked at by Solicitor Capizzi, and see if it needs to be refined, retweaked, adding your comments with that as well, and going from there, and then coming back again in committee, and then forwarding some type of a motion to the general counsel. Purposely, there are several sections that I'm concerned about, as far as 1914A, Section C, when it comes to people staying here for hospital purposes, D, coming here for, units used. You brought up the issue of having a police call. Someone, God forbid, is there because of hospital stay, and then they have a police call, and then 911 carries out, ambulance service that can be misconstrued. Someone could actually utilize that as a contrary, when actually the person probably needed, care. So those are the things that we kind of need to be cognizant for. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about somebody actually malfeasance-wise. Just, I want to make sure that we have the language appropriate, so that way we don't have to fall back, a year from now and we're going to court for a couple $100,000 over something we could have fixed by taking a little bit of time on. Is everybody comfortable with that? You over there on the right, Councilor Morabito. Sound good?
Yeah, I think I have a question based on, we have over 300 realtors in Revere, and me being one of them. And I'm looking at it, I would like to get a ruling by the solicitor, seeing how does this affect at-will leases? Like, for instance, because someone could have a lease and basically leave within 25 days if they wanted to, if it's...
So I'll give you my take on it, knowing what has happened in several properties. Let's say me and Dan, we rent, multi-million-dollar property at the Millennial, and we rent it for the whole year. We can then turn around and put that on Airbnb for $10,000 a night. And even though it's in our name, we still have a right to rent it. So, the law allows me to utilize that lease as long as it doesn't say anything within the lease that precludes me from doing that. That's an individual thing. Now,
I guess my question is, who would be at fault? The landlord? Would it be the
No,
lessee,
because, again, it comes down to use, because if the contract says that they can do whatever they want with it, then they can do whatever they want with it. Down in Cape Cod, where you rent a property, it says that the rental shall not transfer. You know what I mean? So that's basically what we could put into it.
I think you're right, but I think it's something we should have the solicitor look at.
I totally agree with you, and that's a good point. Anybody else? Anybody from the audience? Going once? Going twice? All right. I want to thank you all for your time and your patience. Next issue is going to be CZ-18-06, an ordinance further amending the zoning map of the City of Revere, Section 1, Title 17 of the revised ordinance of the City of Revere and zoning map provided by Section 17.12.020 of said title is hereby amended by changing tax map 34, Block 46A, Lot 1, Morris Street. I won't go into the rest of it. Councilor Simeoni.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Zoning Subcommittee of the City Council of the City of Revere. We've made the presentation at the public hearing, and just to highlight a few points, both lots, Lot 10 and Lot 11, Lot 10 being 4,178 square feet, and Lot 11, which is 4,282 square feet, purchased by my client back in 2005. The intention of the purchase of this land that is presently vacant and has landscaping thereon with a fence that he has put to prevent people in the neighborhood or others from throwing rubbish on it, is to create a buffer between the hotel, which he owns, and also to unify the zoning of the hotel property. These two parcels, these two small parcels, are abut Morris Street. They were purchased in 2005, long after the construction of the hotel. And the idea of the purchase was to simply make sure that nobody else would build there or create a problem for the business of the hotel as well as the neighborhood. So the uniformity of zoning is, the idea there is very straightforward. All the other parcels of HB, we would like the entire hotel site, and these two parcels are part of the hotel site, to be highway business. The ward councilman, Councilor Patch, was kind enough to join us and do a site visit. He's very familiar with the city, this particular area, and he's made his comments at the public hearing. We were also had the chairman, Mr. Rotundo, up there and walked the site to see the conditions that are there now. And those conditions, for the most part, will remain. My client has no intention of changing or using that land other than for what it is. We have spoken publicly and for the council that sometime in the future, if there was off-street parking required for the hotel, that it might be used for that. But that is probably very unlikely in light of the fact that most of the land around the hotel is parking and is in Saugus. The other aspect is that my client has been, as most of you know, his family's been in Revere since the 1900s. He was Revere High School graduate in 1965. He is a Revere businessman for many, many years. His family was on Rumney Road. He started his landscaping business in 1993 and purchasing a couple lots from the city of Revere. Those lots, as you can see on the map that I submitted to you, were then additional purchases from Carl Rowe, allowed him to have a big enough land area so to build his business up, and he had been in business, has been in business for many, many years and just recently retired. So leaving, I think he stopped doing the landscaping business in 1993. So in 1986, he went before this honorable council and went before the planning board of the city of Revere and got the land zoned highway business. And since that time, the hotel was constructed. Originally, it was 105 units. And then the next lessor wanted to have a Marriott franchise and went to 155 units. And that's pretty much where it stands. It's one of the first hotels, other than the one that was on Squire Road, that was built during that era. It was during the Color administration. We believe that this is in the best interest of the neighborhood because it will remain a buffer. No one will take advantage at some point trying to build it for residential uses, and will continue to be the status quo between the business, which is vitally important to my client as well as the city of Revere, because all the years you've been collecting taxes and room fees and all the things that the city wants from these institutions, and I think that's good for everybody. So I'd ask you to recommend to the full body this particular zoning change. I'll answer any questions the members may have.
Thank you. Through you to any of the council. I'm going to start on the left, and Council Patch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I said in the public hearing, that I was in favor of this. After taking that walk around the area with you, I feel there's no way the change will impact the neighborhood at all up there. If anything, it's better to do the change to that they won't have any building on that piece of property. So again, I'll mention that Mr. Chairman, I'm in favor of it, being the ward councilor. Thank you.
Council Powers, then Council Rizzo.
Thank you, Mr.
Councilor
Chairman.
Morabito.
I agree with the ward council 100%. I had occasion 20 years ago to go up there when, I believe it was 20 years ago, when they were putting the addition on the building. I think Bob Hass was the mayor back then. And probably one of the cleanest facilities I've been in. It's professionally run. This man here that from Revere didn't leave Revere. He's kept his business in Revere, and he's helping to build a better Revere by that. And I agree that this property could be used for something else, And I think it'd be great if he could just keep that property dormant, and that would benefit his hotel and the city of Revere tremendously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Rizzo, then Marbuto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we all know, we deal with developers all the time, and, some you can, know you can trust, and others you have to make sure things get down on paper a little bit more. Mr. Spinazzola has demonstrated over the years that he is somebody where a handshake actually matters. And not that we don't dot our I's and cross our T's here as a city, but we can feel very confident when we deal with Mr. Spinazzola and his family that their intentions are pure. My conversations with him have reassured me that he wants nothing more than to just maintain the integrity of that hotel and adjacent property. And I agree with Councilor Patch, who represents that area. If anything, this makes it better for the neighborhood. It makes it less possible for something adversarial to go up there. So,
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councilor Rizzo, you're absolutely right, because moving it to highway business, the minimum lot size is much greater, 15,000 square feet. You would take these two lots and merge them into the hotel. So the goal is of my client, as you stated exactly to the point, is essentially a buffer in perpetuity to protect both the interests of the hotel and the neighbors.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, Councilor. And, I have to say, it's the first time in all my years that I've ever been interrupted by someone when I was saying nice things about their clients. So I
okay.
don't know. I was saying nice things. But I'm glad, Councilor Simeone, that you brought that up. That was my point, is that it becomes
Absolutely.
less possible for something to go up there that would upset neighbors and, in the typical way, usually by way of some sort of residential development. So I wholeheartedly support this amendment and, want to applaud once again your client, Mr. Spinazzola, for being such a credit to the business community in our city. Thank you very much.
Councilor Marbuto.
Thank you. I have the same comments as my colleagues to my left. This amendment is only going to better the neighborhood. It's changing the zoning from residential to highway business, and it's going to be a dormant piece of land. And I spoke to Mr. Spinazzola, and he does not plan on doing anything with that piece of land. And I couldn't see I went to visit the property, the lot, and I couldn't see anything being done with that land either. So I'm in favor of the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that said, Madam Clerk, I'd like to accept the communication from Robert O'Brien regarding, Eugene McKenna, regarding his comments in the vote from the planning board. And I believe we also have other communication on the 29th dictating the zoning ordinance amendment of, that's another one altogether, so I apologize. So if we could take up this via roll call, and we'll put the communication on file, or shall we add it to the,
Well, the city council by law could not vote on the ordinance change without recommendation of the planning board
let's
within a
take
certain
their
number of days.
recommendation.
Yep. So on the zoning map amendment for Lot 1 Morris Street and Lot 17 Teresa Ave, RB to HB, Councilor Morabito?
Yes?
Yes. Councilor Patch?
Yes,
Yes. Councilor Rizzo?
Yes?
Yes. Councilor Zambudo is absent. And Chairman Rotundo?
Yes.
Yes, there will be a favorable recommendation to the full city council on Monday, September 17th.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Next order of business is CZ 1807, an ordinance presented by Councilor Powers, an ordinance further amending the zoning ordinances of the city of Revere relative to the light industry zoning district. I was just earlier reading a communication from Planning Board member, our chairman, Eugene McKenna, and I'll read that later. Councilor Powers, would you like to speak on this?
I would, sir. This, to me, is something that's long overdue. And by the way, I attended the planning board meeting, and it was a unanimous vote in favor of adopting this ordinance, or this zoning change by every member of that board. I spent a lot of time down on Riverside as a youngster. Those were down there were all built as single-family homes. There were just probably a couple of hundred residents down there. Every time a proposal comes up to build high-rises or something else on that piece of property, the people down there can't sleep at night, to be honest with you. It's been a thorn in their side for just decades now. Councilor Rizzo, and when he was chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, chairman of the Zoning Subcommittee, I prevailed upon him, and he worked with me, and we changed the zoning in the Point of Pines section, and also the Riverside section, and also the Grove section, which would be on the westerly side of the railroad tracks in Oak Island, to make sure that this was zoned RA, and that did prevail, and it still is today. There is a boatyard down there now. The boatyard, in my opinion, is in a deplorable condition. I was down there several times in the past couple of weeks. All of this last storm we had back in the spring, all of the moorings broke loose, and they were just left there, floating along the river. We've been down there in the past week. We removed one, and there's one more we have to remove, and that'll happen very quickly, probably within the next week or so. It's just it's the right thing to do, to give those people that live down there peace of mind, so they can go to bed at night and know what can happen down there and what cannot happen down there. And personally, I think I've spoken to many of the people down there, and they would like to see it remain a boatyard, cleaned up though, you know. Awesome single-family residences. There's a lot of kids that go to school down there. It's just a way, we don't want to keep having traffic impact this area. You know, I grew up in the city, and I've seen a lot of changes, okay? And this was probably always one of the most pristine areas in the city where people lived as neighbors. They knew their neighbors. It was just a great community. And it still is in many ways, but let's give the people down there some comfort. Let's say to them, what you want is single families, that's what you're going to get, or the existing boatyard, and there's a couple of other uses that can get down there. But they don't want large developments going in there. Anybody that was down there during the last storms we had this spring, we had at one point the street where Mills Avenue was cut off, 1A North Shore Road was cut off, the boulevard was cut off. It's the wrong thing to allow any large substantial building to go on down there, and that's why I've submitted this ordinance, and I hope that my colleagues will support me on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Rizzo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Councilor Powers' comments, he's correct about, we saw this problem proliferating 10 years ago in the city. And at that time, prior to taking over as mayor back in 2016, probably I'd say about 10 years ago, we wanted to take on the problems that we saw as overbuilding in the city. And so, as Councilor Powers alluded to, both the Riverside and the Point of Pines and in the Grove section of Oak Island, we did change the zoning, he said, to RA, which RA, for those of you that don't know, is single-family homes only. So, because even, two families, just too much density for those areas, we felt. And so that we managed to rally the council to support that, and that has been the way it is since then. It's one of the reasons why I've wanted to master plan the city with respect to zoning, and this is taking certainly a piece of it and putting it in a way that makes sense for the residents that already live here. I think we do way too much to attract people here as opposed to take care of people that do live here. This is one ordinance change that takes care of people who actually live here, who have to drive back and forth to work and get back into their neighborhoods every night. People that have to send their children to school, that are becoming more and more overcrowded almost every day. So this is one thing, one step the city council can take in one little small piece of the city of Revere and make a positive difference. So I absolutely, wholeheartedly support this change. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody from the audience would like to speak? Name and address, please.
Loretta LaCentra, 30 John Ave in the Riverside. I just wanted to, I thank you all for the kind things you've said about the neighborhood and your support of it and this motion. Basically, this will just help us to stop any additional unscrupulous developers from proposing inappropriate projects in our neighborhood. As you know, it's zoned single family except for this particular property, and we've been fighting for decades with developers down there. So I'm asking each and every one of you to please consider that in your vote tonight. And I just think it's long past due to have this happen and protect the neighborhood. Thank you.
Name and address, please.
Eric Lampadecchio, 43 Tapley Avenue. Just like Mrs. LaCentra said, this neighborhood has been facing challenges with some LI properties in the Riverside area for quite some time now. I'd like to thank Councilor John Powers for putting this motion forward. I think it is overdue as well, and I agree that it is needed for that neighborhood. Upon learning about this motion, I began to look into LI properties throughout the city, and I found that there only are several LI properties throughout Revere. The properties are less than 10 total and are in wards 4 and 5. Of those properties, the uses vary. One is an assisted living facility, one is a tow yard, one is a boat yard, and the others are single and two-family dwellings. Given these inconsistencies, I would ask that this board consider looking at LI as a whole in the future and perhaps eliminating it completely and rezoning those properties to conform with their existing neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir? Just hit the button and you'll be good.
Okay,
There you go. Perfect, sir.
thank you. Nah, nothing's perfect. That beautiful painting up there, has anybody ever investigated restoring it? It is such a magnificent painting.
You know, that painting and that painting, I agree, absolutely need to be restored. Yeah, they didn't do a good enough job if they restored it. Wouldn't you agree, Bob? 40 years ago they restored it, okay. So we need to do it this decade, this century, and I'd like to use the ETP funds for that, but I don't know if it would fit the bill, but clearly that is a magnificent photographing, or shall I say painting. You're absolutely correct.
My wife and I are new Revere people. We've been here 6 years. So when we first came here, there was a proposal to build 42 units in the boatyard. That would increase the density in the neighborhood by a factor of 1/3. I don't think I exaggerate when I say that's pretty grotesque. And, you know, when I used to do some zoning in Boston, we talked about something that would change the nature and character of the community. And 42 units would certainly change the nature and character of our neighborhood for the worse. And the boatyard is at the end of a cul-de-sac. The cars would be going up there and then turning around and coming back. So I urge you to favorably consider Councilor Powers' motion and amendment to the zoning bylaws. It would protect our community, which is a very nice community.
Sir, one quick question. What part of Boston were you from?
I was from East Boston.
So you see the density that they're putting there now. It's crazy.
Why do you think I left?
Well, welcome to Revere.
You know, I lived on I had a beautiful brick house overlooking Boston Harbor. They were
Webster Street area?
the Webster Street area, but on Brigham Street.
Yep, right on the corner. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, yes, it used to be called Terrace Place.
Yep, where Joe Kennedy used to live, actually.
I think they lived next to the Samuel Adams School. That was nice. I did a little bit of research.
Exactly, Oil Joe, the father from the 30s. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the history, but more importantly, I appreciate you coming to Revere. You made the right choice, and more importantly,
We love it. We just need a little relief, from over-enthusiastic, overzealous.
I think you're going to get it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. Ma'am, if you will.
Hi, I'm Heather Legier. I live 28 Gilbert Ave down in the Point of Pines, and I just want to thank you, Councilor Powers, for putting up this motion. I think it's been said, we've been at many meetings, and you all know how we feel about it. And again, I just want to thank you. We're all totally on board. That's it. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Ricky LaCentra, 30 John Avenue. I've been in the Riverside for 64 years, and we've been fighting development down there for more than half my life, and this is an excellent motion, and I hope everybody please support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Robert Logue, 19 John Ave. I as well would like to voice my support for Councilor Powers' motion. My concern has to deal with the flooding the councilor alluded to, and raising the grade in that boatyard would cause flooding to further impact the existing neighborhood, and just something maybe to add to the piece of the puzzle.
Anybody else? That said, excuse me. Ragweed, sorry about that. Frankly, this is a very simple issue. I am going to look into adopting RA for the other LI areas, because I can foresee one of the things that we were fighting in the past with Mrs. Hurley was the development of a property right by the bridge in which somebody wanted to put up, I believe it was 100 some odd units, and thank God that didn't go through. But the mirage is there, and I can see in the future somebody wanting to turn it into something other than what it is. And with that said, we probably need to do a little bit more research on that and figure out how we can affect that change. But as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to adopt the zoning amendments that have been presented by Eugene McKinnon, the chairman, as well as Councilor Powers. Madam.
On the zoning change for the limited industrial district, Councilor Morabito?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Patch?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Rizzo?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zambudo is absent, and Chairman Rotundo?
Yes.
Yes, the zoning amendment will be forwarded to the full city council with a favorable recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, on behalf of the residents of Riverside, Point of Pines, I want to thank my colleagues for this vote. Thank you.
With that said, if there's nothing else on the table, which there isn't, I'd like to conclude the September 12th zoning committee meeting. I thank you all for your attendance, your attention, and God bless.